So there are evidence items, documentary evidence items, exposing the lying by Neom Council over the last 4 years. And these items of evidence include items sent to the High Court, the Queen's Bench Division, starting in August 2016 up to this week. And the behavior of this chief legal officer called Daniel Fenwick in Neom Council, who is also called the monitoring officer, is consistent with his behavior when he was employed in another council. Now, Daniel Fenwick is a known on-the-record perpetrator of denials, lies, and illegalities by the council that employs him. And this is happening with Ruxana Fiaz in post, and it was happening with Robin Wales in post. And it was happening when Fenwick was employed by another council in London. Now, Fenwick is not alone. I mean, as I have said, in the case of Tower Hamlets Council, when Lutfur Rahman is in place as the incumbent, so-called elected mayor in Tower Hamlets during calendar years 2010 till 23rd of April 2015, when Election Commissioner Richard Mori ousted Lutfur Rahman. In those years, the person who was in post as the monitoring officer, most of that time, except a few months towards the very end, was Isabella Freeman. Isabella Freeman had been forced to leave Slough Borough Council after she was accused of harassing an Asian man and of confecting and lying about various other things. And when she came to Tower Hamlets, she should never have been hired as a monitoring officer, as the chief law officer in the council, but she was. And the fact that she was appointed, despite that record, proves the complete unfitness on the part of the people who appoint such candidates or persons with such record to posts in local councils which carry huge amounts of money being paid to them because of the designation of these posts that are overrated and completely exaggerated. As the case of the applicant for a declaration of unfair dismissal, Edmonds, is this the man Mark Edmonds that sued Tower Hamlets Council, shows every council and every regime in the councils is like any other regime and any other council when it comes to hiding its corruption and its criminality. So, despite the fact that Lutfur Rahman was ousted following a series of propaganda and claims that he was a crook and he had been behaving corruptly, the misdeeds and the criminality and the corruption and the conspiracies perpetrated by a number of employees in the youth service in Tower Hamlets Council during the period of Lutfur Rahman's occupation of the post of executive mayor. These crimes were covered up, hushed up by the regime fronted by John Biggs. Now, John Biggs' entire career as a kind of elected mayor now has been created by Lutfur Rahman's corruption and criminality and denial. And Biggs has presented himself and has been allowed to present himself as not corrupt, as opposed to corruption and criminality. But when Biggs took over first elected on the 11th of June 2015, and later again in 2018, in May 2018, Biggs has behaved corruptly and dishonestly and criminally. So extrapolate that or apply that to the case of, or the cases of Robin Wales and Ruxana Fiaz in Newham. Next door, physically next door. Fiaz has been covering up for Robin Wales's lies and corruption and criminality. That is fact. And that is fact despite the fact that Fiaz has been on the record as decrying Robin Wales's dishonesty and criminality and lying. For example, here is the kind of bits of the transcript of that particular appearance on the 12th of March 2018. And what is she saying? There is a person who is sitting to the left of the presenter in that program, while Fiaz was sitting to the right of the presenter. So that person is saying any number of kind of hyperbolic praise things to praise Ruxana Fiaz. And the targeted viewers are mentioned as what? Bengali, Pakistani, Indian. So he says, Roxana has always stood up against oppression. That's what this person says. Roxana has always stood up against oppression. But there was a hate crime as a Bengali, Pakistani, Indian, even white people, whatever it was, a multiracial society in Britain, that is a multicultural society. Whatever it was, Roxana is the person to unify the Labour Party in. And the other candidate is Sir Robin Wales, and Roxana is actually better than Robin Wales. That is the essence of this piece. But that phrase or that particular utterance, Roxana has always stood up against oppression. Let's look at the evidence. Roxana has not stood up against oppression for a start because Roxana has not been known to have existed until she appeared about 4 years before the 2018 election, and she became a candidate in 2014 and became a councillor. But even after the 4 years as a councillor in Newham, she was not heard of. She had not been heard about. I appeared on the same channel for 2 days after Roxana Fiaz appeared. And I appeared by accident. I wasn't going to appear there. I was invited at the last minute by the presenter, the host of that second program, which was attended by Robin Wales. So in that appearance, Robin Wales made a number of claims, which I have mentioned before, but the main thing here in this context is the claim that he didn't challenge the anti-social or anti-labor or anti-poor or anti-council housing legislation started by Margaret Thatcher, because he, Robin Wales, was legally advised not to do that. Now, I said to him that I wanted that legal advice to be made available to me. And Robin Wales promised that he would make the advice available to the program. He never did. So I contacted Newham Council. Remember, that was March, And the election was yet to take place at the beginning, the first week of May. So March, April, May. So that was the 14th of March. So there were 30 days, April, and then 14th of March, that's 6 weeks before the election. So during that 6-week period, I sent several emails reminding Robin Wales of his promise. No reply. Absolutely no reply. So when Roxana Fias took the place, and I happened to be greeted by her at an unexpected encounter, which she staged with me at the reception at the East Ham Town Hall. She praised me for holding her to account, that is to say, her and her group or crew. She said, "Thank you for holding us to account." Now, until that time, I had never spoken to Roxana Fias. I had never met her, and I had not spoken to her, nor had I had any communications with her. So, what on earth was she referring to when she praised me and congratulated me and thanked me, whatever, for holding her and her crew to account? What was she doing? So she must have been aware of my campaigning activities, either directly by watching programs or by watching that particular program that I had appeared opposite Robin Wales on the 14th of March 2018. Now it's important to mention the aftermath or the repercussions of my appearance opposite Robin Wales on the 14th of March 2018 on that particular channel, which as such is defunct now. But the persons who were involved with it are still doing some sort of broadcasting online, which is not relevant to this point, but which is relevant otherwise in general context, which we shall be covering in due course. Now, this broadcast, the KHOODEELAAR TV channel, is going to be made a regular kind of channel in terms of the varieties of topics that we shall be covering on a regular basis. There will be a schedule, and there will be coverage of news, coverage of investigations, coverage of other things. Currently, we are still testing various issues to do with the architecture and the infrastructure and so on. But the contents of what is being broadcast here, these are finalized contents each time. And these are also contents that are covered by world exclusive authoring and copyrights, claims and rights and assertions. Now, the essential difference between this broadcast and the BBC or the ITV or the Sky News in the context of the UK is that they don't have any dedicated investigative connection with any of the events going on anywhere. And this is the difference that distinguishes this channel with others as well, others that are online and are presented with all kinds of decorations and stuff. But the uniqueness of this program and this channel is unique because it is taken, the contents taken directly from the ongoing campaigns, activities, observations, updates, and investigations. And the other uniqueness is that we are commenting on contemporary events. This is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And this one, in case anyone has just joined or is viewing this for the first time, is about the absence of evidence in the contents of the Fleet Street newspapers, like the Boris Graph. These are all shadow wrestling and shadow coverages. And the same thing is also in the business section of the Boris graph. And they are not talking about what we are talking about, the biggest issue in terms of social exclusion and denial and deprivation of human rights, apart from the particular topic of the COVID and the pandemonium that we call it, of the Boris Johnson-fronted government in dealing with the crisis caused by the COVID-19 arrival in Britain and spread in Britain, resurgence in Britain. Apart from that particular and a headline topic, all the other issues are being treated exactly in the same way of negligence and indirect kind of repeated and copy-pasting kind of mode. They are quoting one another, citing one another, but not actually basing any of their contents on any investigation, including the claim that the Telegraph is running a piece of by their science editor now, Sarah Napton, maybe the science editor, but we never came across her in terms of creating any original investigative reporting on science. And there are all kinds of experts advising Boris Johnson to do this way or that way, which actually shows that they are not talking about the investigation, they are not talking about engagement with the actual origin of the virus in one cycle or whatever, or the previous cycle, and its travel through various stages until it reaches the end, with whatever outcome and effects and ramification on the victims of the virus. And that's symptomatic. That is symptomatic of the blankness and the blanket emptiness of the media, and symptomatic of the emptiness of democracy in this country. What Roxana Fiaz claimed to be pledging to deliver to NEOM if she got elected was put in that particular claim on her behalf, that Roxana has always stood up against oppression. Now that sums up quite neatly an image that she is against oppression. So all kinds of wrong things she would be against. If she had been always, now there was no record on that occasion when it was asserted, this assertion was made by this peddler for Roxana Fiaz on the 12th of March 2018 or since. In fact, when this particular individual was contacted, he feigned unfamiliarity with somebody with whom he spent about 2 hours or even longer on a recorded kind of series of events where he introduced himself as being a beneficiary, as having grown up under the educational and other protections given to him by a close relative of the person that he was contacted afterwards and whom he claimed not to have recognized. And this is the kind of quality of integrity or morality that actually is the consistent pattern in the behavior of everyone in NEOM, especially everyone in the NEOM Labour Party and the NEOM Council that has played any role in organizing the selection of candidates and the actual propaganda for the candidate, canvassing for the candidates, and the acquisition of the elected positions for these candidates. So when she says that NEOM has been a stronghold of the Labour Party, What she meant was that there was no accountability, there was no culture of accountability anywhere in Nivam, especially not when it came to the Labour Party's candidates for either mayor or for individual councils or for the two parliamentary constituency seats and their MPs. And the reason why the MPs are relevant are that all the allegations against Rukhsana Fiaz and her administration, all the charges of lying and corruption and dishonesty leveled at Rukhsana Fiaz in writing and repeatedly, and without any change in the substance of the allegations made against Rukhsana Fiaz, against John Gray, and against the rest of the so-called administration Nivam Council, have been copied exactly to the two MPs, Stephen Timms and Lynn Brown, consistently. But there has been no challenge to the authenticity, the accuracy, and the veracity of these assertions from either Lynn Brown or Stephen Timms. If they were, they would have been rebutted and exposed as rubbish, irrelevant, and not acceptable, and not valid, because the assertions made against Rukhsana Fiaz, against John Gray, and against the other co-liars still in place in Nivam Council would have been rejected because the allegations are true. They were true then and they're true now, and they will continue to be true forever. So when Rukhsana Fiaz is reported by some parts of the Fleet Street kind of media that she was concerned about the lifting of the ban on court proceedings about eviction applications, and she was painted as being genuinely concerned for the rights, for the housing rights, for the human rights of the targets of the eviction proceedings. That was a strategically placed line of lying to promote Rukhsana Fiaz's image. That was not true. That was not truthful, and that was not substantiatable or substantiated by the peddlers so far. That could not be substantiated, let's say. There is no member of the Labour Party who took any part in the process whereby Rukhsana Fiaz was allowed to pose herself as a candidate who would bring honesty, accountability, democracy, fairness to Nivam Council's behavior. Anyone who took part in any of that has committed a crime every time they have denied the lying, the deception, the dishonesty, and the fabrication that Rukhsana Fiaz has benefited from, whether she mainly scripted those fabrications or these had been fabricated, configured and scripted for her by others, makes no difference. Essentially, the entirety of the Labour Party in Nivam, which Rukhsana Fiaz boasted about as being the stronghold or a stronghold of the Labour Party. Every single one in the Labour Party that has played any role in backing Rukhsana Fiaz's candidature and has been staying silent in the last 2 years plus few months since she got into that post, has been committing multiple crimes of colluding, crimes of conspiracy, and crimes of breaking the law, and crimes of obstruction to the course of justice, and crimes of defamation. Because a lot of the lies invented by the liars in place as employees of the Nivam Council A lot of the lies were invented in order to rob the particular target claimants of their lawful claims to lawfully available housing, local housing allowance, or equivalent housing benefit. All the lies constitute and have constituted defamation because they were invented lies, they were not true. And the fact that there were lies against the integrity of the person targeted by the liars and affected by the lies constitute clearly defined rules, clearly defined grounds, clearly defined evidence of defamation at every level, both under the 2013 Defamation Act and also under the precedent and common law definition of defamation under previous legislation and also under previous decisions. For example, the decision made in the case of McAlpine. Now the McAlpine is now dead, but McAlpine sued the then wife of the then speaker, Barco. And that was McAlpine versus Barco. One of the rulings, let's say, was before the Honorable Mr. Justice Tugendhat, between Lord McAlpine of West Green, claimant, and Sally Barco, the defendant. And this former conservative Edward Garnier, QC, and Kate Wilson, instructed by RMPI for the claimant, which is McAlpine, appeared, and the William McCormack, QC, and David Mitchell, instructed by Carter Ruck for the defendant, hearing dated 16th of April 2013. And in the case, Mr. Justice Tugendhat said in this live election, the claimant applied by notice issued on the 7th of March 2013 for an order that the question of meaning be determined by a judge as a preliminary issue. Such applications have become increasingly common in recent years, and so far as the court and counsel are aware, there has not previously been a report of a contested application, although since the hearing I handed down my reasons for not ruling on actual meaning of in Hamaizia against Commissioner for Police of the Metropolis. And in other cases, the parties have in effect agreed either that there should or that there should not be the trial of such a preliminary issue. In many live elections, there is little difference between the parties as to what the words complained of actually mean. Now that's what I mean. When somebody lies and says that X, who turns out to be later a complainant and claimant, lives at a property where the complainant doesn't live at the property, that doesn't need a judicial intervention or explanation. That is obvious. Either the person lives there or they don't live there. So, continuing, if the defamer, the defendant in the later case, says that that person eats bacon, let's say bacon, and the person never even touched bacon because of their religious reasons or whatever, that doesn't need judicial kind of examination. If the defamer says that that person actually takes their meal by going into the room of their flatmate, whatever the flatmate is, and the fact is that that never happens for all kinds of reasons which are obvious. So that doesn't need a judicial adjudication. So, when Rukhsana Fiaz was told that the criminals, the council employees behaving as criminals, conspiring, had said that the claimant shared the kitchen in the flat, and that the claimant never uses the kitchen because the claimant buys their food outside from restaurants, and everyone who knows the claimant knows that as well. This is simply, absolutely easily kind of possible to check the veracity of. It doesn't need a court action. So the liars were told the facts, and they were asked to withdraw that fact because the allegation was absolutely untrue and the assertion was absolutely untrue. They refused to do that. And following that, an application in defamation was filed in the Queen's Bench Division in August 2016. So all the details are there. And what I'm saying is that Rukhsana Fiaz knows of all the details. And she knows that the claim that the particular claimant shared the kitchen is absolutely untruthful and untrue and will remain so forever. And yet she refused to get those liars to withdraw that lie. So Rukhsana has always stood up against oppression. That is a lie, because Rukhsana Fiaz has been failing, refusing, choosing to allow the oppression to continue, to be perpetuated. And that is just a tip of the iceberg of the lies that the Labour Party in Newham has been committing and perpetrating in order to keep the stronghold strong. A time will come when the weight of evidence of lying by Rukhsana Fiaz and lying by the Labour Party and the lying by the council employees and lying by the councillors will become too much to hide and justify. And the stronghold will collapse. Now, what good will that be to the targets of the lying? The targets have been targeted for all these years and are currently used as targets by the current lies and denials by Rukhsana Fiaz fronted Newham Council and the Rukhsana Fiaz aided deputy mayor at the expense of housing in Newham called John Gray. These liars are knowingly adamant. They are knowingly adamant in defying the demands, reasonable demands, truthful demands, honest demands, lawful demands, demands that are justified by the provisions of the Human Rights Act, that they should withdraw those lies and they should hold the liars to account and they should pay the robbed targets of lies and the defamed targets of lies all the initial basic sums that they robbed and the attendant damages that they have caused by causing the victim or the target of the lies to have to spend additional time, resource, energy in looking for sufficient sums of money to borrow from other sources in order to pay their rent, because it was the money stolen by Newham Council from the local housing allowance that the particular claimant was entitled to, has remained entitled to, which had to be made up for, had to be kind of the shortfall that they created. Niwam Council had to be made up for every week. And as the person was not in a geographical location that facilitated any engagement in an independent business or whatever to generate the necessary amount of money, the money had to be borrowed. And the borrowing, as anyone with any experience in debt and borrowing without any plan or without any prior arrangement or agreement knows, borrowing can be wasteful of time. Entire days, entire weeks may pass before any sum of money can be borrowed. So imagine the actual depth of desperation created into the situation by the liars in Niwam Council. And the desperation was being experienced by the target of the lies. That is 1,000 times oppression every day, because there is uncertainty as to where the shortfall would be met by, what kind of source would be willing to lend 200 pounds, that is the rent amount, every week. That is the amount of rent payable every week. And if the rent is not paid, then the tenancy is completely insecure. And if the tenancy is insecure, the person, the tenant, their life becomes unlivable in terms of doing the things that ordinarily they would be doing. So the actual robbery created a multiplicity of additional obligations, problems, rushes, emergencies every 24 hours. And to say that Rukhsana Fiaz has been in willful denial of all this evidence makes her quite literally a criminal, and an intended kind of criminal who intends to be a criminal, behave in a criminal way. And she is not alone. She is being aided and abetted in this criminality and crimes by John Gray, as well as by the monitoring officer Daniel Fenwick, as well as by the chief executive, as well as by the councillors, the other councillors. The other councillors are relevant here because one of the other councillors, called John, this John is not the same John as John Gray, but he is another John. And the John, the second John, referred to by a Labour Party member as our John, that reference to our John will be discussed in due course in another edition. This John, our John, was given the evidence and the information of the criminality perpetrated by the liars in place in the Niwam Council's housing benefit section. And this John, our John, had promised to do the necessary to break this lying and to arrange for the target of the lies and the defamed claimant to be paid the original sums as well as the damages. That was the understanding on which the target gave him the information, at the request of a very significantly active at the relevant time member of the Niwam Labour Party, who knows both John Gray and the Our John. And so therefore, there was reasonable expectation on the part of the claimant that this would be treated fairly, honestly on the evidence and truthfully, and the lies would be withdrawn, and the overly overdue local housing allowance would begin to be paid in full, and the logjam of debts would begin to be addressed in a suitable way by the person who had been forced to borrow the money. Now that's one aspect. This is something that is being on the record, so it can be played, and you can see just how many facets to the oppressive lying regime being fronted by this liar, Roxana Fayaz, has been. Not only has she not been capable of understanding her own oppression and oppressive behavior, oppressive collusion, but she doesn't seem to have existed anywhere in the last known periods where there has been any campaign against oppression in Niwam. So, what has been happening in the 2 years plus 4 months since Roxana Fayaz became mayor, replacing Robin Wales, has been that she has been citing, mentioning, parroting, kind of chanting like a kind of mantra, the name called the previous administration as a capital she can exploit. She has been focused on exploiting the perceived legacies of lying, corruption, antisocial behavior, and other things that can be cobbled together into creating an image of Robin Wales as the baddie. And she is the goodie in comparison with Robin Wales. That is the obvious target or obvious purpose behind the statement of outrageous stupidity and dishonesty and criminality. That is, Roxana has always stood up against oppression. She never did. She never did. Because when this particular lie was uttered on that channel on the 12th of March 2018, that was, of course, months before it was known, months before it would be known, let's say, that a journalist previously associated with the Sunday Times, Michael Gillard, was engaged in writing a book or was planning to write a book or was planning to interview or have at length conversations with Roxana Fayaz. This became public knowledge during 2019 mostly, when Gillard actually published his book about the 2012 Olympics that took place in Stratford, which is in Newham, and allegedly claimed to have investigated organized crime that interfered with that Olympic Games and interfered with a lot of decisions taken in the name of Newham Council. Now, in 2012, Newham Council was still under the regime of Robin Wales. So, that was 2012. That was 6 years before anyone would hear of Roxana Fayaz, anyone outside, that is, anyone outside of the Newham Council clique, because she had been a councillor, but nobody had known her name in public in terms of outside and general kind of recognition. I didn't know about her name until I appeared against Robin Wales on the 14th of March, 2 days after Roxana Fayaz appeared with that particular participant who praised her to the skies and called her, Roxana has always stood up against oppression. That was a lie. From the word go to the last word in that paragraph or this phrase. Roxana has never been against oppression. The only oppression she has always been against has been to do with her protecting herself and anyone near her or her family, whatever. That is not the same thing as her being always being against oppression generally. Nobody has heard of her. And I have campaigned against all kinds of oppression, including in Newham, for years, even before Robin Wales arrived in Newham from Scotland. And as I said to him, I told Wales on air on the 14th of March 2018 that I had been doing that. So this particular individual had no right to assume that somebody like me would allow them to get away with this kind of assertion, because there is no factual basis, there is no ground, there is no evidence, and there is no reason to allow that kind of lying, peddling, and promotion for a liar. Now, this person was addressing the people who are perceived to be the main viewers of that channel, which is ethnic minorities, mainly Bangladeshis and others, Pakistanis probably. Essentially, what Roxana Fayaz has been doing in this week's peddling of herself via the Newham Council's website, saying that an attack on people's housing or home is unacceptable, it's wrong, plain wrong. Now she is the one who has been attacking people's homes and housing rights for longer, far longer than Robert Jenrick has been. Because Jenrick has only taken his post as the minister in Boris Johnson's cabinet at the expense of housing, after Johnson appointed him. And Fiaz has been in post as the incumbent mayor in Newham for 2 years now and 4 months. And the amount of damage that Roxana Fiaz has done to the victims of Newham Council's corruption and criminality and lying and conspiracy, the amount in proportion is overwhelmingly bigger than the amount of damage that Robert Jenrick has done to any number of people in Newham. That is fact. So we have absolutely no evidence in front of us or publicly accessible that justifies Roxana Fayaz being given that kind of platform by the media, whoever the media is. And let's check again what the media and we shall be talking about the McAlpine defamation action against Sally Barco, the wife of the then Speaker of the House of Commons, in due course another time, and we shall be talking about other court actions. But currently, what we are looking at is the behavior of Roxana Fayaz parading as an anti-eviction campaigner. That's what we are looking at. And we are saying that the evidence on the ground in Newham contradict her parade and parading pretensions. So let's look again at what is happening with the fears. Yes, it's 3 days ago. The Guardian. It's probably taken from the website of the Newham Council, and also from the Newham Recorder. Remember, the Newham Recorder is being edited by a complete, absolute moron. Now, this is not the same thing as being a complete, absolute racist, but she's a moron. And we shall be coming to look at the role of the Newham Recorder in promoting the likes of the lying Roxana affairs in due course. So look at the version that the Guardian printed that gave the reference to Roxana Fias. This is the one that is dated. It's Patrick Collinson. It's dated the 18th of September, Friday, last Friday. 18th of September 2020, 11:57 GMT. And let's see where, yes. She is being quoted in the same piece where they have got other people like Lee Barcode from the London Renters Union being reportedly kind of quoted. So Roxana Fias, the Labour Mayor of Newham, said the lifting of this ban on eviction suggests that COVID-19 crisis is over. But this is taken from the website of the Newham Council. But we know that is far from the case. In fact, we are currently fighting to halt a slide back into a second wave of the infection or of infection. She added, at a time when people are being forced to miss work, either due to new infection or because they have to self-isolate within a household, or because to the shame of this government, they can't get a test. It is plain wrong to threaten people with losing their home. Now, she has given other kind of relevant implications and impacts. And yet, the enormity of damages and losses suffered by and caused to the victim of the lies by the Newham Council employees who were causing a situation to exist that constituted round-the-clock threat to the person threatened with homelessness, being threatened with loss of their tenancy and their home. So how can she be allowed to say this or be allowed to be quoted as saying this while she is doing that? That is to say, she is colluding as we speak, as we broadcast, as we record this. She's colluding with the criminals in place, in post, in Newham Council at this time. So if the government's removal of the ban on the eviction proceedings is plain wrong, how can her collusion over the last, let's say, 2 years and 4 months with a gang of criminals in place as employees of the Newham Council, causing daily nightmarish 24-hour uncertainty and desperation and anxiety to the target of their lying, which is easily disposable, that lie, because there is material evidence, there is written evidence, and there is physical evidence that can anytime be checked. And there are dozens of witnesses who witness this particular claimant buying their food from restaurants. How can Roxana Fias be so confident that she can lie and she can be able to escape accountability for the lying, and that she can escape accountability for the huge losses and damages these liars have caused, and she is colluding in the continuation of being caused to the tunes that are beyond the worth, the total values of the entirety of the Neom Council and its known assets put together. That is the volume. That's the beginning of the amount and the size of the losses that these liars have caused and have been causing. This question must be addressed fully, and as we are doing this, we shall be continuing in the next edition. And this is now 1646 GMT on Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020.